If you're watching this, it means you're accessing our non-premium version of this content. If you'd like to access our premium version, please head over to Patreon and subscribe. You can find a link in the description. Patreon supporters get access to this content days before it goes live anywhere else. It's ad-free, and you get access to exclusive content that's not uploaded anywhere else. It's our Patreon supporters who help us ultimately on our mission to reconcile between people in conflict, and without you, we couldn't be doing what we do. So, thanks in advance for your support.
The worst readers of the Bible are Israeli speakers. They do not only not understand the Bible, they misunderstand the Bible without realizing that they misunderstand the Bible. Let's begin.
Welcome to Standing Up. I'm going to start recording just in case we get to some good stuff here. So yeah. I actually first heard about you from Sherry Sufi. That's
wow.
Yeah, because
wow.
You're always on the live streams with him. So that's how I kind of found out about you. But my story is I was born in New York. I grew up in New Jersey most of my life. When I was 18, I moved to Israel. After the army, I got involved. Well, first I got involved. I was a nightlife promoter in Tel Aviv for many years. For tourists, I would bring the tourists to all the clubs. So it's a pretty cool job to have. Then,
it's amazing.
Yeah. Eventually, I got into activism, really connecting between Israelis and Palestinians, trying to foster communication and reconciliation, essentially, engage in the humanization process. I did that on my free time, but never, I don't make money doing activism, so I still had to work. So I wasn't really able to invest much time in it. Around close to a year, I decided to start doing more content and focusing more of my time in activism. So the first show that I started was the Standing Up podcast, where I interview activists from all over the world.
Yes.
You'll actually be the second linguist I've interviewed. I interviewed Noam Chomsky as well.
Wow. That's amazing.
It was Sherry who actually connected Noam and I. So I know you know him as well.
Oh, I know him, and I think that Sherry has met him, I think, independently, but I have met Noam several times.
Okay.
So we have been in touch for many years, but I think that Sherry arranged this interview, and Sherry asked him about politics, and I asked him about linguistics and political correctness, and it's like an interview that gave me more appetite to discuss further because anyway, so that's wonderful. So how was your interview with Noam?
It was good. We didn't speak about linguistics. He only had 30 minutes. So I didn't really get to ask him as much as I would have liked to. And some of his answers I didn't agree with. Like we've had, obviously I don't agree with everything he said even prior, but some of his answers here, I really just thought he missed it, but I take partial responsibility because it's possible I didn't frame it correctly. But I think the biggest one was, he wrote the book Manufactured Consent. It's a very important concept to know. It's how the mainstream media with the corporate establishment manufacture the consent of the people. So what I tried explaining to him is today when you have all this denialism of climate change and vaccines and these conspiracy theories, if you get to the bottom of why they believe what they believe, they think that vaccines is just the establishment manufacturing their consent. They view it as something similar. It's just coming from a different place. And he didn't like that I used his term to describe a slightly different phenomena, even though it's very similar. And then I said, it seems like we have an issue of knowing what's true. The average individual, let's say I want to now get to the bottom of vaccines. The amount of research I need to do creates a barrier that doesn't allow the average individual to distinguish truth from false. And he said, and this is where I really disagree. He said, it's not hard to know what's true. Anybody can figure it out.
What you're saying is exactly parallel to something that happened to me at the University of Cambridge. I was at the University of Cambridge attending a conference and I gave a lecture, and I think there was another conference at the same time, so I was invited just to listen. There were like 1,000 people in the audience, and there was a very important person. I don't know the name, but he publishes about fake news, and he has this idea that he can teach you how to identify fake news. So it's kind of fake news antidote. And I think that it's not the professor himself, but some kind of an associate who gave the lecture, 1,000 people. And they say that they can teach you exactly, you hear something in the news and they have their own kind of mechanisms to say what is manufacturing consent and what. But then I played very naive. It's England. You know how England has this kind of sometimes, especially Oxbridge, has double language, etc. But I'm very blunt, being an Israeli. And I asked, do you know what the most ancient fake news is? And I said, no, I don't know. Well, what are you talking about? Because of course they talk about only the 21st century, as if fake news was invented in the first 20th. And I said, well, of course. I mean, Jesus Christ. I mean, religion it's the biggest fake news. And you had to see all these people, all these kind of snobbish kind of professors at the University of Cambridge. They said, what kind of Philistine? Jesus, I mean, like religion is totally different. It's not fake news, it's religion. And then I said, wait a second. So what you're saying about what happened with Noam is that he did not like the fact that you took a term that he coined, and in my case, I took the term fake news,
right,
and applied it to an unexpected realm, which according to how you understand manufacturing consent and according to how I understand fake news is totally legit, but they see it as illegitimate. And this is where you suddenly realize that there are some axioms involved. And when he told you that he can tell you exactly what is fake news and what, I mean, this is palpable poppycock. I mean, it's a little bit like if one person goes and says my mother is a virgin, you'll put him in the hospital, in a mental hospital. If 1 billion people say that Jesus's mother was an alma, which we know means young maiden, but parthenos in Greek can mean also virgin. So actually a linguistic error. If 1 billion people say, then of course it's okay. So what I'm trying to say is that I often feel the same. I mean, there must be a term for it. It's almost like projection. So people do not like when you project something that they defined, and they decided on the scope. So Noam decided on the scope of manufacturing consent.
Right.
The moment you get out of the scope, he actually doesn't like you. And the same happened to me at Cambridge. Fake news is when Trump says 1, 2, 3. But of course, that Jesus can do miracles, or that Yahweh, I mean, I don't care about Christianity. I mean, I'm talking about religion in general. When Lord Arthur William Burton Russell wrote Why I'm Not Christian, somebody said, oh yeah, you see, I'm not Christian, I'm Jewish. I decided, but of course what he meant was why I'm not religious, not why I'm not Christian. So it's a total misunderstanding. Again, a projection. I mean, in this case, they didn't like the projection. It's like the other way, because why I'm not means why I'm not religious, but they understood it specifically, the scope. They say, okay, I don't like Christianity, but I will be Muslim. I will be so it is a total misunderstanding of Bertrand Russell. But this is in the other direction. Whereas what happened to you with Chomsky, with Chomsky actually, because as you know, Sherry and I asked him whether. Oh, sorry, you might not know it. I asked him whether I should call him Chomsky or Chomsky. And Noam told me that when I speak Israeli, I should call him Chomsky because Israeli has the but when I speak English, I should call him Chomsky because if I say Chomsky, so it's an interesting distinction. So I changed it in my book. So I've written about, I think I've mentioned Chomsky in this book called Israelitza Fayafa, and I think it's Chomsky, but I'm not sure. Is it? Yeah.
Interesting. By the way, should I refer to you as Ghil'ad or Professor Zuckermann?
Ghil'ad,
right.
And Ghil'ad is good as Noam, as Adar. So you are Adar, not Adar. Adar.
But in
Adar,
English, people call me Adar. My name in English is Adar. Most Americans don't pronounce it right on the first. Most English speakers don't pronounce it right on the first try, but Adar is generally what.
And Weinreb, are you related to Professor Weinreb from the Open University, or?
Not that I know of. It's an Austrian name, from what I know. Yeah. I did have one great uncle that was a professor, Einhorn. Yitzhak Einhorn. He has the second largest. Well, he passed away at the age of 104 a few years ago. He has the second largest Judaica collection in the world. Wow. And there was a book written years ago where they referred to a professor as More Shmilkiyahu. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So that was him. He was More Shmilkiyahu.
And where was he based, Einhorn?
Einhorn was in Tel Aviv.
Because I had a friend, Einhorn, in the army. And it's not a common name.
No, it's not. It means
she was a lovely. I think she was a native speaker of English. This is why I'm asking. And then when it comes to Weinreb, I had a friend called Ruth Weinreb, who resided in Sydney, and she wrote a book about the F word, an entire book about the F word.
I'm interested in that. Have you ever seen Osho's take on the F word? Are you familiar with Osho, the mystic and the guru from the 80s?
Yeah, Osho. Yeah, tell me about it.
So he has like a 5-minute video just on the word fuck.
Just on that.
And it's quite brilliant. I'll send it to you after, and anyone watching, we'll put a link in the comment. You know, we started this conversation informally, but you're okay that I use any of this for the final cut, right?
Absolutely. Okay. I can tell you that I'm not allowed to use the F word in class by university, even when explaining what something means. So, for example, I explained in a class, undergraduate class, that you have what they call grin fucking. Grin fucking is in England, sometimes like in Oxbridge, when people see you, they say, "Oh, how lovely to see you. I thought you were supposed to be in Tel Aviv." So this means fuck you practically, but it's kind of said in a very nice way. So I taught Chinese PhD students at Cambridge, and they would come to me and say, I taught them academic English. It was just a side job. I think I volunteered or something. And the PhD students asked me, my supervisor told me this is a brave proposal. I don't understand, because I thought that he meant that I was courageous. But you know what I mean? So they totally misunderstand the double language. So I made a mistake of using the F asterisk 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 off in the PowerPoint. And somehow it got to somebody above me, and they told me that I'm not allowed to use the. I said, but this is linguistics. This is like psychology, not to be. And then when people talk about freedom of speech not being touched at universities, this is palpable poppycock, especially in America. I mean, in America.
I mean, the freedom of speech seems to be dying quickly in America, and the universities, unfortunately, are leading it. Those used to be havens of free speech, and today it's being limited more than ever. It's quite unfortunate. Yeah,
absolutely. This is the end of intellectual integrity. The moment you do not allow people to speak, and this is in the name of political correctness gone mad. And this is exactly what I asked Noah. And I was happy that he kind of said that sometimes it is kind of gone mad. So he admitted that PC can go mad. However, he was still very defensive of political correctness, etc., which in my view is so I'm definitely more. So if you have like a person who would not care less about political correctness, and a person who is PCGM. So while Chomsky would be here, I would be kind of here. Of course, I wouldn't say that. So, for example, I don't know if you heard about a man and a women. So somebody said a women. I mean, this is PCGM, but there is another one. There was a professor.
Although, wait, I so on that point specifically, I think actually that was misconstrued, because can I get an amen, a women has been like a thing that black pastors have said for many years. But I think because there's a hypersensitivity now against wokeness, as it's called, which is just a form of it's you could call it social justice that's based off critical theory is essentially what it is, and it's known today as woke politics. So there's like a reaction to that. So then when they heard him say, "Can I get an amen and an a woman?" people freaked out. But if you actually think about it, if he was being woke, he wouldn't have said that because he's acknowledging two genders, and that is actually anti-LGBTQ according to wokeness. So people actually, I think, misinterpreted that. That was an anti-woke statement.
No, I mean what you're what it's funny because what you're saying is that it's a little bit like when they asked me once whether I feel bad that a Muslim, there was a Muslim who said that 9/11 was actually happened because of Mossad, and no Jew was killed there. So people attacked it, and then I said, well, actually, I'm very happy that he said it would have been much worse had he said, I'm very happy that 9/11 happened. Muslims should kill all the people. So in other words, it's almost like defending the flawed. So I defended that Muslim, but of course it's a matter of relativity. Of course, you're right. I mean, sometimes people come to me and say, for example, I received a letter, given that you're a man, you should consider retiring early, etc. I'm 49. And but all the professors received, all the male professors. And then you can say, wait a second, why are you only into men and women? You should, what about transgenders and non-specifics and what?
Right.
So it's like you're one step ahead in the chess game. However, but I want you to recognize the fact that it's a little bit like if there is a terrorist, you say, why do you, and the soldier stops him and he said, why do you stop me? And say, well, you look like a terrorist. And then he says, well, but had I been a terrorist, I would have looked like you. I would have. So it's kind of, it's a little bit kind of outsmarting or wise guy. Look, I mean, another thing is about niggardly, not niggardly, nega in Chinese. I don't know if you've heard of that.
I was actually going to bring that up. That was going to be my example because a professor just got in trouble for using the term nega. And when I was in China, there was a meeting. I was at a business meeting. I had a translator, and I heard them say nega, nega, nega. And
nega.
And nega. Maybe explain what it is, and then.
Yeah, so nega. I hear it a lot, and I've never thought about nigger. I've never thought about negro, because it's like this. It's like yani, So it's
or
what
like. It's like we say like a lot, so they say nega.
So nega, it means it's a filler, F-I-L-L-E-R, and what there are two functions. There are two functions for a filler, and this is very, very important. People say, the new generation. The adults, the old people say, oh, all these people say yani keilu. And I went to and I told him, and I told him like. People don't understand. This has two functions. Firstly, I am taking my time to think. So this is one function. And the second function, which is the most important one, shut up and do not disturb me. So, in other words, when somebody says, so they want to say, look, I'm thinking, so it gives them time to think. This is one function. And the other one, don't interrupt. So it is actually very important. The same with Ke'ilu. And I said to him,
like,
or just like, exactly.
Right. Okay.
In English, it's the M. So the point about nega, it has nothing to do with nigger, negro. However, I can tell you that in my group, I have a group of alumni from the United World College of the Adriatic, where I studied between the ages of 16 and 18 before I went to the army in Israel. So I was in Italy. And some people there, actually, I was surprised, including some Africans, etc. They actually said, no, he should not be allowed to say nigger because he should be aware that where he is, America, and as you know, most Americans unfortunately suffer from what Australians suffer, and this is a monolingual mindset. They believe that, everybody just speaks English and everybody should know English. So this person specifically, I don't want to mention her name, she said, no, he was wrong. He should have not mentioned nigger. But I mean, look, I do not know the person. I mean, if he's racist and he chose it on purpose, that's a different story. I don't think so. I tend to assume that people are nice, good. I mean, why should he be racist against
Right.
But I was surprised that people like that, they're actually against nigger in America, because they say if you go to America, you need to know all the words, all the sensitivities of the host country, and therefore you're not allowed to say nigger. I think it's ridiculous.
So I'm with you on that. So when I was in China and I heard it, I actually did make that association. I found it interesting that they said it, and I stopped the meeting and said, "Why do you keep saying nigger?" And they cracked up. They said, "No, it doesn't mean that." Like it was a funny situation, but
yes,
the way I make of it of people trying to control language, I think people innately have a drive for power and to be able to control their surroundings. And I think when you're, in a group that is disadvantaged or doesn't have power, and maybe some immutable characteristic puts you at a disadvantage, then it might make the drive for power even stronger, because you feel like you're at a disadvantage, and it makes you maybe deploy tactics that powerful people see as ridiculous. But it doesn't mean that we should accept it as okay. And I'll give you an example, because any group can do this. So we're Jews, right? We come from an oppressed people. I did not see you. Not see. No, don't say not see. It's too similar. You know what I'm saying? So we can play this game as well and say, you're not allowed to say not see, because it's too similar to not see, right?
Yes.
So cake. Oh no, that's like kike, right? So we can do this, and if we wanted to control the way people spoke, then we could do this all day. So I think it's important to understand where it comes from, and I think a lot of the problem we see in woke politics, there's a deeper underlying cause that we should try to address, and a lot of it comes down to lack of meaning and socioeconomics, and maybe feeling like you're not part of greater society, which does cause some kind of psychological harm to a population, right? Whenever you have a minority population living amongst a minority that doesn't view them the same, it causes all sorts of deep frustrations. So we need to understand that, but it doesn't mean we need to accept the response to that, right? We could try to direct the response to healthy mediums that will help elevate the people who need to be elevated. That's kind of how I see it.
Absolutely. I think that I've been recently contacted by two people. One is somebody I do not know who asked me whether she can spell Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi
has not seen it, yeah.
Is N-A-Z-I. I said, why not? I said, because it means Nazi. It's like and I said, oh no, I mean, this is how we write Ashkenazi. I mean, in English, N-A-Z-I. But then I suddenly the penny dropped, and I understood why. I have a friend, Professor Ashkenazi, with an S. He writes it, and now I understand why. And the other thing is a new friend, John. He's a comedian in Melbourne, a lovely guy. What's his name? I'll tell you. You might have. He's one of the best Jewish comedians in Australia. John Safran. John Safran. Have you heard of John Safran?
No, I'm not familiar with him.
Safran is nice. Safran is like saffron, like a bookkeeper. And John Safran told me he's writing a book about Philip Morris. Philip Morris is a cigarette company.
Right. It's the biggest cigarette company I know in Israel, maybe in the world.
Exactly. So yeah. I think in the world. And they were told that they're not allowed to produce cigarettes. So what they did, it's a linguistic manipulation. They invented something which is like a cigarette, he says, exactly the same kind of, but they say you don't smoke it, you vape it. It's not a smoke, it's aerosol. It's not this. So it's all linguistic manipulation that causes people to say, and also they invented the word to unsmoke, not to smoke, to unsmoke, which is genius, So I talked to John and I told him, look, linguistic manipulation is at the heart of what religion does, what politicians do, what political correctness activists do, and sometimes it has a reason. So, for example, when you say chairman, I assume that after a while, a young girl expects the person to have a man there. Why do I say so? Because I have a friend called Lera Boroditsky, and she conducted some kind of an experiment. She asked people about the word bridge. And in some languages, the word bridge is feminine. For example, say German, die Brücke. Brücke is a bridge in German, and it's feminine. And in some languages, it's masculine. For example, in Israeli, Gesher. Gesher is Gesher Gadol, the big bridge. Or let's say Italian, Ponte, Il Ponte, Ponte Vecchio, so the old, not Ponte Vecchia, so the old bridge in Florence. So what she discovered was that when people talk about bridge in languages where the gender, the grammatical gender is feminine, they describe the bridge as elegant and as beautiful. When people talk about a bridge in languages where the bridge is masculine, they describe the bridge as sturdy and strong. And she argues that it is all subconscious. Of course, it is subconscious. If you're not a linguist and I ask you about a bridge, you wouldn't think, oh, wait a second, a bridge is masculine. It's not like, there is no manipulation. It's innocent. It's naive. And this is fascinating because it does say that a language can change the perception of reality. And this is what Benjamin Lee Whorf talked about at the beginning of the 20th century. He was very much influenced by Einstein. So Einstein talked about relativism and relativity. And he said, actually, in language, it's the same. So this is called relativism, linguistic relativism. So if, for example, he argues, you do not have a future tense in your language, you will not be able to plan. If you don't have numbers, you will not be able to count, etc. However, I think that he is wrong if you understand him in the kind of strong sense. Strong sense. He's right if you understand him in the broad sense. So in other words, language does not dictate the way you think, but it influences the way we think. So for example, I remember I was 16 and I looked at a girl and I felt that I looked at her and I hoped that she would do something that both of us want to do, but so far nobody has had the guts to initiate. But I knew that she wanted it, I wanted it, but we were both shy. Now, I didn't have a word for it, but I remember that I had this feeling. It was at the age of 15, I think. And then suddenly I learned Yagan in Tierra del Fuego in Chile, Argentina. It's a language, it's a beautiful indigenous language. And they have this word, Mami Shapinatapai. So Mami Shapinatapai is exactly that, to look one at the other, hoping that the other side would initiate something that both of us really want to do. But so far, nobody has had the guts to initiate. Now, the fact that I did not have it in Israeli or in Italian, or I don't know, in other languages that I spoke at the time, but definitely in Israeli, which is my mother language, my mother tongue, does not mean that I was not capable of feeling that concept. I had this feeling, I had this concept in my mind, but it was 26 words, whereas now I have one word. So I disagree with Whorf if you understand him very narrowly. I agree with him if you understand him kind of broadly. Now, coming back to the question about manipulation of language, or la puissance du verbe, or the power of the word. Look, I've written a book called Revivalistics. It's a new book. It has just appeared in just now.
I'll put a link to that in the description as well if anybody wants to.
And there is a chapter here which my friend Azan Yadin, I don't know if you've heard of him, he's a lovely guy from Rutgers. He contributed immensely to this chapter. So this chapter started as collaboration, as an article between Azan and me, and it is an amazing chapter. Why? I'll show you. They call it defying religion and deifying nationhood. So defying as le'atger, in Israeli, and deifying or deifying as making God, making it like God, deification, so I'm deifying something. So to deify nationhood means God is dead, the new God is the nation. That's nationhood deification. And conscious ideological secularization of Hebrew terms in Israeli. So what happened in Israeli at the beginning of the 20th century and at the end of the 19th century and then throughout the state of Israel? We took words that were exploded of sacredness and holiness. For example, Mishkan. Mishkan is where you work God, you worshiped God. It was Ohel Moed, where you had like the 10 Commandments, and this is where the Jewish priests went and worshipped God. That was Mishkan. I believe that the fact that whoever decided that Mishkan HaKnesset, the parliament building, would be called Mishkan, did it because he understood, or she understood, or they understood, that Mishkan evokes holiness among any person who read the Bible. So in other words, when you enter the parliament in Israel, Mishkan HaKnesset, the building of the parliament, building is a very bad translation into English because Mishkan evokes the feeling that you have angels or seraphs or cherubs there within the Mishkan, rather than say thieves or, like sometimes, God forbid, rapists, etc. So Mishkan is deifying nationhood. In other words, there is no God. And Zionism is obviously, by and large, a secular, atheistic movement. There is no God. There is a God. It's the new God. It's a nation. And the same with Miluim. Now, in Miluim, most Israelis do not know what I'm going to tell you. But actually, I think that there was this manipulation, ideological manipulation as well, or ideological secularization as well. Miluim in the Bible is a period, I think, between the Kohanim are ordained and the time in which they work in the Mishkan. So it's a period that has to do with Kohanim, the priests, the Jewish priests. I'm a Kohen, according to my DNA. Zuckermann is a Kohen in my case. And Miluim is that period. But now when I go to Miluim, like every year you need to do Miluim, it's a reserve duty. So you don't work with the God anymore, you work the state. Now, Sar HaBitachon, if Sar HaBitachon, the Minister of Defense, called before the war, called a rabbi to tell me, Rabbi, should we go this way or this way to Lebanon? You would have laughed at him. I mean, it's crazy in Israel if Sar HaBitachon. However, when they signed the Declaration of Independence in Israel, and here is control, as you said so beautifully, and manipulation, they sign it as מתוך ביטחון בצור ישראל, הננו חותמים בחתימת ידינו. So, מתוך ביטחון בצור ישראל, as you know, for a religious Jew, it means out of faith in God. But for an atheist or for a secular Jew, and many of them were, it means out of defense, out of M16s, out of F16s,
So,
out of weapons. So, מתוך ביטחון, ביטחון in the Bible means faith in God. But bitachon today, Sar HaBitachon, does not mean the minister of faith. It means the minister of defense. So in other words, this was a great manipulation, a linguistic manipulation, without which the Declaration of Independence in 1948, which, by the way, is like the Constitution of Israel, because we don't have a constitution in Israel, would have never been written. So, I mean, it's a linguistic manipulation that allowed the state of Israel to be established. So this is why, and I discuss it in the book, in that chapter 3. It shows you how beautiful people use language. Now I'll give you another example, and then I'll allow you to speak. The language is the example is Blorit. This is defying religion. Why? Blorit or Belorit in the Mishnah, in Maimonides, meant mohawk. Mohawk is when you kind of shave here,
right? Yeah,
and then
it's a Native American term, from what
yes,
yeah,
exactly, like the last Mohican, Mohican, yeah, exactly. Now, what happened was that in the Mishnah, the mohawk, like David Beckham had a mohawk, is considered a totally un-Jewish characteristic. So when they talk about the Jew, they say the Jewish barber. They say a barber can cut the hair of pagans, no problem whatsoever. However, when he touches the Belorit, he needs to stop because Belorit is abominable. It's kind of totally un-Jewish. It's like eating pork. It's like having sharpness, the garments should not be sharpness, which is kind of a mix, etc. So you're forbidden. You should never have a Belorit. However, what happens in Zionism, and this is fascinating in my view, the Zionist, because the Zionist is kind of, if you want, anti-religious, non-God-based pagan, you need to have a Blorit. Now, it does not mean mohawk; it means a forelock, like Elvis Presley had a forelock, or And when you die and when you are a palmachnik, and they write a song about you, they say "Hayta lo blorit mekuzelet se'ar, hayta lo batzchok ba'inayim." He had the blorit, a curly blorit. So, ונזכור את כולם, את יפי הבלורית והתואר, Chaim Guri, this beautiful song, and also Dudu, הייתה לו בלורית, and there is another song about, אנחנו שנינו מאותו הכפר, אותה בלורית, אותה בלורית שיער. Yeah, so we were both from the same village, we had the same blorit. Of course, one died and in the war, etc. So if you want to be a good Palmachnik, a good IDF soldier, a good Zionist, you need to have Blorit, which is the most pagan characteristic in the Mishnah. So what it says is defying religion. We are the new Jews. We are pagans. We have long hair like Samson. We do not have the orderly hair like the diasporic Jew. So it's anti-diaspora and anti-religion at the same time. And this is the beauty of Zionism. Zionism is based on negation of diaspora and negation of religion. But what is fascinating in the language is that Israeli shows you that both negations failed. The negation of diaspora failed because when an Israeli speaks Israeli, Hebrew, as they say, he or she actually continues to speak a lot of Yiddish, which is the feminine, homosexual, feeble, persecuted, etc. language of the diasporic Jew. And of course, Ben-Gurion, when he listens to Rozhka Korchak, the Yiddish speaker from Europe who came to address the Histadrut about the Shoah, about the Holocaust, and she talks in Yiddish about the atrocities of the Nazis, he tells her in the most horrific statement when it comes to EQ from today's perspective. His EQ was minus, whatever. But of course, I'm a wise guy kind of analyzing it. I don't know, like it's 1944. So it's, what is it now? It's with 76 years later. So he says, זה עתה שמענו חברה מדברת בשפה זרה וצורמת. So we have just heard a comrade talking or addressing us in a language that is foreign and cacophonous. Again, zara vetzoremet. He tells about Yiddish. Yiddish, his mother tongue. Yiddish, the mother tongue of the vast majority of Holocaust victims, etc. He says, safat zara vetzoremet. So a cacophonous foreign tongue. I mean, this is crazy in today's terms, apropos political correctness. I mean, this is beyond politically incorrect. This is kind of totally insensitive. It's not like to say nigger, it has nothing to do with that. So coming back to political correctness, I would have never in my life thought of saying such a horrible thing as Ben Gurion said, and very few said. I mean, some people protested against it, of course, because it sounded even then horrible. So not only now, but by and large, I mean, nobody remembers it until
Right.
you. So you see, Israeli, the negation of the diaspora failed. When you say manishma, you do not even notice it's Vserzer. Was hört sich in German does not mean how are you. It means what's heard. But in Israeli, manishma means both what's heard and how are you, because in Yiddish, Vserzer means what's heard and how are you. Of course, if you came from Romania, you would use it because of Chese Aude, which means the same thing. And if you came from Poland, because of Tsoslichat, and if you came from Russia, because of Shtoslichna, and if you came from Georgia, because of Raismis, etc. But the point is that Israelis speak Israeli with Yiddishisms and with Yiddish constructions, etc., without realizing it. So this is kind of the ultimate camouflage.
Fascinating. Fascinating. We never had an official start to this interview, and I think we might just put it out as is. It's been natural flow. So we will touch on some more topics, but it didn't have the starting point that I imagined it would have, and that's completely fine because it's been a very insightful conversation up until now. One point on the PC that I forgot to mention, which actually proves the point. We mentioned the Chinese word nega and that there's control, but so you said there's a few people who you met who are against using that term. So I actually just want to talk about a real world effect of that. There was a professor he was a linguistics professor. He was explaining to his class this term and what it means. And there was a reaction to that. And he had to, I don't know if he had to resign, but he had to step down for some amount of time until they further investigate his intention. So it was important for me to just add that little bit to show that we're not just hyping up, this notion of PC culture or limitation of free speech. We're actually showing real world effects and professors that need to step down because they're actually having an honest conversation about linguistics in Chinese. So I kind of wanted to wrap it up by mentioning that last point about it.
I'll give you an example. By the way, this professor had to stop teaching that course. And the
dean, who I'm talking about? You know the professor I'm talking about?
Yes, I do not know him personally, but I can tell you one thing. The moment I heard about it, it was just several hours after it happened because it was, I immediately emailed him and offered him as an expert of forensic linguistics and lexicology and etc. My free services as an expert witness for a trial that I thought that he needed to sue the dean, not the African Americans who complained about him.
I agree.
Because this is, by the way, perfectly okay. I mean, I have no problem with the African American who got offended, although I should probably refer them to what my friend Stephen Fry said, and let me just read it for you. It's very funny.
But yeah, I do agree that it is the dean's responsibility. The students have a right to complain. People have a right to complain, right?
They have the right to be offended. No problem. Why should students not be offended? But it doesn't mean that the professor has to be sent home. It's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. It's now, this is my friend Stephen Fry, who is a famous actor in Britain, and he interviewed me 10 years ago almost, and since then we became friends. He came to Israel to interview me about the Israeli language, and this is what he says in 2005, before I met him. It's now very common to hear people say, I'm rather offended by that, as if that gives them certain rights. It's actually nothing more than a whine. I find that offensive. It has no meaning. It has no purpose. It has no reason to be respected as a phrase. I am offended by that. Well, so fucking what? I saw hate in the graveyard, Stephen Fry, The Guardian, 5 June 2005. So the fact that they were offended by nigger, great. They have the right to be offended. I have no problem with that. But so fucking what? How can the dean, who is inflicted by this PCGM, how can he write to the professor, the one that I offered my free services to, but he never replied. I'm sure that many people offered him services, etc. But I do it professionally. So I said, okay, why should I not help this guy? Because it's ridiculous. The point of the matter is that it shows you how much Americans suffer from the monolingual mindset and how much they cannot think beyond the American language, as if Chinese is not an important language. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like, can you imagine that you say something in Chinese?
There's a form of narcissism to it. There's a form of narcissism to it. I'm with you.
But look, about PCGM, we could speak.
We could go for days. What I would say about offending people, if I'm going to shine light on the other side, if you want to be an effective communicator, you should not intentionally offend, right? So I think people take, with everything, there's nuance. So people will take the reverse stance and be like, I'm just speaking the truth. There's no problem for you to be offended. But as we know, not every truth is a useful truth. And if you want to be an effective communicator, it does help to use language that the person you're speaking to will be receptive to. And I could give a perfect example for my activism. I have no problem with the term Palestine. I have no problem with the term occupation. But if I'm speaking to an Israeli who's right-winger, I'm not going to use either of those terms because I know they're not going to then be receptive to hearing what I have to say, right? If I'm with a more left-wing crowd, sure, I'm going to use that. That's not me being two-faced. It's just me effectively communicating. So there's an important nuance there, but being offended doesn't mean that the person did something wrong. Like, we need to understand both sides of this.
But here, actually, I would like to add something that Confucius said in 2,500 years ago. So in 500 BC, just when the Hebrew Bible was codified, was kind of finalized, he said, "别证明乎." No, "别证明乎." So it's very important, the tones. The first thing one has to do is to rectify names. Now, Confucius, who was a genius, said it, I guess, about politics. So the first thing a politician has to do is to rectify, to correct, to change names, because names influence the way that people would understand the concept that you're talking about. And this is very clever. And I'm not saying that political correctness is not based on good foundations.
Right.
What I'm saying is that it has gone mad. So in other words, I'm not saying, so it's not, nobody can accuse me, oh, you speak so much against political correctness. No, I'm speaking against political correctness gone mad.
PCGM.
I'm speaking against the fact also that to be a white man in the 21st century is an abomination.
Right.
Like, at least be homosexual, at least be, non-specific, at least be, but white man, this is ridiculous. Now, is a Jew a white man? Well, I guess so. If you look white, I mean, what about Jews who do not look white? I mean, it's very complex, but the point that I was referring to, and I mentioned the Chinese, the Confucius one, because we were talking about nigger, and Chinese is one of the languages that I work on. In a book that I wrote in 2003, Chinese features a lot. But why did I mention that? Because when I introduced the term Israeli to the discourse about what I call the Israeli language, I offend people. So I kind of violate what you have just told me about how to speak to people who are
Right.
fanatic, because they're fanatic about language. And I believe that Yossi Sarid, for example, Zichrono Livracha, he died. He was as fanatic as Avshalom Kol, who is a psychopath from the word psik, which means comma, not from the word psuche, like piseach, like psuche. You know, psuche in Greek means nefesh, or, psychopath is like somebody
Oh,
is wrong.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking about psik with a kuf, not with a kaf. It's a pun that does not exist in English. But psuche as opposed to soma is the body, and psuche is the anima, the nefesh, the soul. And then there is this beautiful story about piseach and soma, and it was analyzed by some clever people. Piseach is psuche, and soma is a blind, and piseach is somebody who does not walk properly, like how do you say it? Solea, like
Limping.
limping. So Pisech and Soma, it was kind of a phonosematic matching of Psuche and Soma. So it's kind of the body and the soul philosophical discussion, etc. But this is beyond what what I wanted to say and what we are discussing. I'm coming back to the point about Yossi Sarid. Yossi Sarid was a left-wing politician in Israel from the party called Meretz or Ratz initially. And
You're just acknowledging, what happened because you coined the term Israeli as a language rather than Hebrew.
Exactly. So in other words, I agree with Confucius. The first thing you need to do is to rectify terms. And what you did with Chomsky, by the way, when you took manufacturing concept and you applied it for a scope which is a little bit beyond what he meant it to be applied for. And what I did with fake news, when I applied it to religion and religion talk, so I applied it to Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein said that religious talking is neither true nor false. It's meaningless, So when I took fake news and suddenly in this Cambridge
Right.
what do you mean? I mean, you're discussing fake news, but what about Jesus walking on water or Jesus, doing miracle? I mean, this is kind of the fake news, obviously. Mm-hmm. I mean, don't tell me you believe that somebody would walk on water. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's ludicrous. And then they said to me, "Oh, what a Philistine!" They looked at me as if I had just kind of came up from under a stone. Like what kind of a Philistine is this guy? Apropos Palestine, I'm saying Philistine, not Palestine. So what I'm trying to say is that you and me, despite what you've said about understanding whom you're talking about, sometimes to get our thought across, we use either a new term, or, as in you and Chomsky, you use his term, but you actually show him that the scope of his term is different from what he thought. And this is, by the way, semantic shifting, because meaning, in a way, is within a circle. And by the way, if we talk semantics, I always try to explain to my students, for example, you have the set of diamonds, all the diamonds. So you have a red diamond. A red diamond is a red individual in the set of all diamonds. And then you have a green diamond. A green diamond is a green individual in the set of all diamonds. And then I tell them, what about a fake diamond? So then they say, oh, it's a fake individual in the set of all diamonds. But wait a second, but it's not a diamond. So you see that semantics actually has a lot of it's like a Play-Doh, not only Plato as in Platon, but also Play-Doh. You can whatever you want.
Amorphous and malleable.
Exactly.
I want to get on touch on a few more topics, but just so we could get to everything, I'd like to keep each topic now to maybe 5 minutes. So try to give like a quick summation of each topic. So first of all, let's start with your most controversial or your most notable controversial opinion, which is Hebrew being called Israeli. Okay, and we did discuss this, but I just want to get like a brief explanation of when does a language, so based off that idea, would you say that Hebrew was not revived? A new language was created? Is that fair to assume?
No. Israeli is the result of the Hebrew reclamation. When you reclaim a language, which is a sleeping beauty, in other words, a language that has no native speakers.
Mm-hmm.
In Australia, I call such languages dreaming beauties because of Jukurpa, which is an Aboriginal idea of dream time and dreaming. So it's kind of a pun, dreaming beauty. But in the case of Israeli, or Hebrew, sorry, it was a sleeping beauty following Bar Kokhba. After 135 AD, nobody speaks Hebrew as his mother tongue, nobody. And in 1000 AD, you will never find a native Hebrew speaker. It's impossible.
Wow.
It doesn't matter what people will tell you. You know, there are many myths, like fake news. Yeah, exactly. Israeli is a revival language. Any revival of a sleeping beauty, in the very best case, would result in a hybrid. So Israeli is a revival language, and it belongs to the family of revival languages rather than it belongs to the Semitic family.
Interesting.
Or Indo-European family. So this is an important revolution when it comes to historical linguistics, because in historical linguistics, which is a very important branch of linguistics, we use a tool that we call the Stammbaum model or the family tree model. According to the family tree model, every language comes from one source. I'm sure you've seen these kind of, it usually goes from top to bottom. So you get Indo-European, so Proto-Indo-European, Germanic, Greek,
Right.
and then from Germanic, Yiddish.
But now it's consolidating today, correct?
So what I'm saying, and this is the congruence principle. I'm saying that in the case of revival languages, and by the way, some linguists take my ideas for other types of language, but never mind. I mean, let's focus on revival languages. It's the opposite. So in other words, when you revive a language, any language will be based on what you want to revive, in our case, Hebrew, and your mother tongue or your mother tongues. So, for example, I'm currently reviving Bangla with the Bangla Aboriginal people in Australia. And of course, their mother tongue is English. But my mother tongue is Israeli. And the person who wrote down the dictionary in 1844 was German. So the result, if you want reclaimed Bangla, Neo-Bangla, or whatever you want to call it, will be based not only on Bangla, but also on English, on Aboriginal English, on German, and on Israeli, because that's my mother tongue. And maybe on Italian too. I can show you some examples of how Israeli and Italian influence the Neo-Bangla, or whatever term you want to call it eventually. So coming back to Israeli, it's not what you said. You said to me, you decided to call Hebrew Israeli. No, Hebrew is a language of Isaiah. Not Isaiah Leibovich, Isaiah the biblical, another prophet. Israeli is a different language. It is based on Hebrew, as well as on Yiddish, as well as on other languages. In that interview that Stephen Fry did 10 years ago with me, I came up with this idea of, it's funny, he loved it, and I think this is why we are friends. It was just a spontaneous thing. But so Israeli, on the one hand, is a phoenix, rising from the ashes, that's Hebrew. On the other hand, it's a cuckoo, laying its eggs in the nest of another bird, tricking it to believe that it is its own bird. This is Yiddish. On the other hand, it's a magpie, stealing. So from American, from English, British English at the time of the mandate, not just American, but nowadays it's American, of course. And then from Polish, from Russian, from Arabic, when I want to curse in Israeli, it's usually Arabic.
It's Arabic, right? Right.
I don't say like ben avat mardut, or I don't say kol Torah mi ben ainecha. You know, usually it's the semek,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
etc. So I mean, it is Arabic. So we stole. So so Israeli is a Finnic cuckoo cross with some magpie characteristics. It's a rara
Okay.
owl.
I like the bird analogies. I like the bird
Yeah.
analogies.
You should like it. You know, in Madama Butterfly, the opera, there is a very beautiful scene in which the consul, the American consul, comes and asks Madama Butterfly, you know, whatsoever. She had a child with this American soldier, and she asked the consul, "Tell me, consul, the American soldier who made me pregnant, she's Japanese, of course, he told me that he would come back when the birds nest. Tell me, in America, don't they nest once a year like in Japan?" And he answers in a very memorable kind of diplomatic sentence that, you know, it reminds me what a diplomat is about. And it has to do with what you said earlier. Non ho studiato ornitologia. I have never studied ornithology. So, of course, he knew that the birds nest once a year, just like in Japan. But he just wanted to get out of it, you know, like in a. And this is again the manipulation of language, you know. Of course, I mean,
Right.
So he kind of, you know, she was quiet.
So I want to tell you a story. A few years ago, well, many years ago, I was in Turkey on vacation. I was in an elevator at the hotel, and some guy's speaking to me, and I'm like, "I'm sorry, sir, I speak English." And then I understood he was actually speaking to me in English, but he was from North England, maybe North UK. I'm not sure which.
Yes.
Eventually, I could make it out to be English, but it took some time. At what point does a dialect become a new language?
You know, it's you know that Weinreb, Max Weinreb or Uriel Weinreb, one of the Weinrebs, I think it was Max, the father of Uriel, he quotes a teacher from the 40s who told him that in Yiddish, of course, a Sprach is a dialect mit an Armee und Flot. A language is a dialect with an army and fleet or navy. Nowadays, you might change it to a Sprach is a dialect mit a Duolingo course. You know, Duolingo course. So a language is a dialect with a course in a Duolingo. Do you say Duolingo? This or you know another Duolingo? It's called, right?
Yeah, the famous app.
Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
a language is a dialect that already has a course in Duolingo or another one. I don't care about.
Okay.
You know,
Rosetta Stone. Yeah, there's many.
A Rosetta Stone or Babel is very good. I study languages. I kind of collect languages naturally. I don't use. I don't have time for apps, as you know. We, as professors these days, there is too much administration and too much administrivia, so no time for beautiful apps. So, a Sprach is a Dialekt mit an Armee und Flot means that a language is a dialect with political power, with a flag, with nationhood, with a national sovereignty. So, of course, if you come from, say, Scotland, and you speak Scottish English, well, maybe soon there will be such a thing called Scottish, not as in the language Scots, not as in the Celtic language, but Scottish English. Because to be honest, I also, when I take a taxi in Glasgow or when I take a taxi in Singapore, I cannot understand. I mean, Singlish is a different language. People say it's English. It's not English. I mean, in the case of Singlish, I know it's absolutely not English. It's Baba Malay relaxified by English, and Baba Malay is Hokkien relaxified by Malay. So in a way, you speak Hokkien in English because it's kind of a double, you know, like I had a friend, I was professor in Singapore for a year, and a friend came, an Israeli friend came to visit me, and he asked the taxi driver, because I couldn't pick up, "Can you take me to Kent Ridge?" And the taxi driver said, "Ken." Ken. And my Israeli friend said, what? How did you know I was Israeli? Excuse me? Because he said can, it doesn't mean yes, as in Israeli, yeah. Yes, we can, as Obama said, yes, we can. It's not like English, French, and Israeli for yes, but rather he said can as in yes, I can, like can. But this is actually, how would you say in Hokkien? You just use the word can, which means can, I can take you. And then the guy said, do you want to countries la? And this is another thing. La is a perfective kind of word, lexical item, a little one, a particle, milit, and the guy, the Israeli thinks, oh, he also says la. In Israel we use la as in no, from Arabic, la. You didn't go to the army to Shmone Matayim, to this la. So he totally misunderstood him. But coming back to Glasgow and to your question about Scottish or let's say Northern English, etc. Absolutely. Dialects sometimes are totally different from the mother language, much more than another language. I'll give you an example. I speak many dialects of Italian. There is one thing called Furlan. Some people say it's a dialect of Italian. Some people say it's a different language. For example, se tu vens casutas cretis la che lor mian soterat, ale un splat splendishtelutis dal mio sanc lestat bagnat. This sounds like Italian, much less than, Granada, tierra soñada por mí, which is Spanish. So in other words, Spanish is much closer to Italian than, say, Neapolitan, cosa t'ha mangiato che t'ha fatto mal, like, che cosa hai mangiato, etc. So what I'm trying to say, a dialect and a language are totally extra-linguistic terms. In China, they say we speak Chinese. What do you mean? There are 10 different languages that constitute Chinese. Cantonese is a different language from Mandarin. It's not the same language. Of course, I'm not talking...
Shanghai has their own language. Fuzhou has their own language. Yep.
Exactly. Shanghainese. My wife is Shanghainese. I mean, she speaks a totally different language from Mandarin.
Right. Yeah.
So the point I'm trying to make is that Arabic. People say, "Oh, we all speak Arabic." What do you mean? I mean, you mean the Fusha, the Arabic, which is kind of the classical Arabic, the modern standard Arabic. However, if you really speak Moroccan Arabic, I mean Moroccan, it's Moroccan. I mean, and you cannot really speak to an Iraqi. Like it's a totally different.
So let me reinforce that. I was in a conference in Jordan. It was a peace building conference with young activists from all over the Middle East and North Africa. Moroccans and Palestinians and Iraqis would speak English with one another, not Arabic, because it was the language that they all understood. They couldn't understand each other's Arabic. So yeah.
Yeah, and don't forget another thing which is interesting in many of these countries. When you go to a kind of a high-level school, like in Jordan, you often study in English. When you're a pilot in the Jordanian Air Force, you speak in English. I mean, when you kind of course, before you crash, God forbid, you speak in Arabic, you shout in Arabic, because then you go back to your mameloshen, to your mother tongue. But when you speak, I'm here, I'm coming, I'm about to land, etc. So this is Arabic. And the same happens, of course, in India, where, everybody speaks Hindi, etc. Well, of course not. But then, of course, everybody speaks English if you go to the right schools. I'm sure you could have met Arabs who do not speak English, and then they would have resorted to some kind of Fusha. It's a little bit like a Jew from Poland going to Egypt, say in 1600, and say, "Shalom lecho," is peace on you. They would never say manishma, because the other guy would not understand them. What is manishma in Arabic? I mean, you cannot say manishma for how are you, So the shalom lecho, nobody says it in Israel today. Whenever people say shalom, I meet somebody new. Where are you from? I'm from Israel. Shalom, I say to them, most Israelis say, Mamatzav, hi, manishma.
Alan, which is Arabic, right? Alan is Arabic. Alan,
yeah.
Alan, yeah.
exactly. But people would usually say Alan, like not.
Yeah, we don't say
Ahlan,
shalom. We don't say shalom when we meet each other. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But try to say it to. I mean, this is the difference between the reality. Like if you look at books from the past, or say prescriptive or normative books, even in America, they will teach you shalom, shalom kita aleph, but actually instead of just teaching you how Israelis really speak, 10 shekel, patish 5 kilo, כואב לי הבטן. I argue that American professors, so professors of Hebrew in America, should teach people Israeli as it is. They should not rape Israeli. They should not slaughter Israeli with fake grammar. Fake grammar in this case is Hebrew. Israeli grammar is not Hebrew. So it's not only lexical items, it's the entire grammar. When I say yeshli, there is for me, I have. After yeshli in Hebrew, the ancient language of Isaiah, must come the nominative or the subject. So yeshli ha-sefer. So I have the book in Hebrew, yeshli ha-sefer. But in Israeli, after yeshli comes the accusative, yeshli et ha-sefer. Yeshli et ha-sefer. So I have the book.
The grammar is different as well.
Absolutely, the grammar is totally different. Ko'ev li habeten. Ko'ev li, it hurts me, but ko'ev is masculine. Habeten is feminine. So people say, how can you say ko'ev li habeten? Well, you can. Es tut mir weh, so it hurt me in Yiddish, and then you can say whatever you want, the Eugen, the boy, etc. So in other words, it hurts me, which is like Yiddish, and then comes whatever. And it doesn't matter. You don't need the agreement between ko'ev and the subject that comes after. Unlike Hebrew. In Hebrew, you do need to have. And of course, for phonology, when Israelis speak English, it's very rare that they sound like Arabs. Usually they sound like Dutch, they sound like Germans, sometimes they say French, but it doesn't have the Semitic. I'm talking about most Israelis. I'm not talking about my Yemenite friend's grandfather. He says, אני מקווה שהכסיסו, אני מקווה שהקציצה. I hope that the meatball, whatever. So he says, which is Hebrew. This is how Isaiah would have said, but I say tzitza. He would have said aplaton for Plato, but I say plastic with pla. No problem whatsoever. I say shrimps. Shrimps with
not
in Hebrew.
You don't say shrimpim, right?
Or in exactly, or like I say with a in for example, in Japanese, when you want to say table, you cannot say teburu. You need to cut the cluster of like a French woman. I had a French woman. I'm not able. She couldn't say able. She had to say able. Right. But in Israel, we have no problem with all these things like shrimps, tzitza, etc. In fact, when you write Israeli, you use the Aramaic script or the Hebrew script, but actually the sounds are totally European. So this is why you have people writing ikvotav. I'll show you. It's actually very funny. I'll write it to you here. So ikvotav. Ikvotav. You see, ikvotav. Of course, it should have been written like that. It should have been written ikvotav. It should have been written like what I wrote, but of course in Israeli there is no difference in the pronunciation between ikvotav and ikvotav. So ikvotav, it's the same thing. I mean, I can give you mashkanta.
It makes Hebrew harder. So that's why you have kuf and kaf, taf and tet, shin or sin and samech. It's you're saying they should not have the same sounds, but they do because of how Israel was revived, how Israeli was revived.
because in Yiddish, there is no difference. I mean, in Yiddish, you do not pronounce the ah, the ta, the pa, the sa. It's a Germanic language. We don't have all these.
Right.
Like my name originally was Ghil'ad with an I, Ghil'ad. But people say Ghil'ad, like Julia Gillard. Julia Gillard was the prime minister, a female prime minister of Australia. So Ghil'ad, but it's not Ghil'ad. So when I speak to Arabs, they pronounce it Gilad, Gilad. It's the original pronunciation,
Right.
which is, but obviously it's kind of ironic. It's kind of shocking that at the Knesset in Israel, you have Ahmad Tibi, who says that he speaks the best Hebrew in the Mishkan. I mean, it's topsy-turvy. He's not a native speaker. He has an accent which is totally un-Israeli. But he's right that according to the Hebrew language, which is that ludicrous organization or institution in Israel that tells people how to speak. I mean, it's ridiculous. Think of America. Like, will you have an American institute that tells you how to speak? You should not say she's taller than her. You should say she's taller than she is, which is the original way. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, if you think about it. But there is such an august institution in Israel. And tell me.
Yeah, no, it's just I don't want to cut you short, but there's like 3 or 4 more topics, and we're already we're closing in on 2 hours. So,
yeah.
Do you think there's any benefit for language to be gendered, masculine, feminine?
You see,
besides for the poetry that you may get out of it, is there a utility to it that makes it better?
So you're talking about the fact that Shulchan is masculine in Israeli rather than feminine.
Yeah, and in Russian, for example, they also have neutral, right? They have 3 different,
In German, der, die, das. Yeah, so das baby, the baby is kind of, or das Fräulein, it's like neutral because she's a young girl, Alma, still virgin. This is apropos Jesus and mother. But then when she becomes a woman, she's die Frau. So, from das Fräulein, or das Mädchen, Alma, sorry, Mädchen. Mädle, in Mädchen in German, Mädle in Munich, they would say Mädle, just like Yiddish, Mädle. So das Mädchen, das baby, because he's not a baby, you don't know whether it's a girl or a boy, etc. So I understand the logic here, but then the question is, why should Brücke in German be feminine and in Italian be masculine, etc.? So firstly, I would like to tell you one thing. Grammatical gender, unlike what people think, is actually very important when you look at language contact, and I will explain that. I attended a lecture in Oxford by a famous linguist, so famous I don't remember which one it was, and he said, it was a man, that grammatical gender is like a male nipple. It has neither function nor purpose. And I raised my hand, blunt as I am, and I said, excuse me, I would like to contradict both components of your sentence. Firstly, who said that the male nipple has no purpose? My nipple is very erogenous. I touch my nipple,
right.
When I touch, nothing happens. But when a woman touches,
it turns you on, right?
So, it's like it's almost like my kids, they love me scratching them. It's like a cat. You like scratching it. The cat likes. So this is rubbish. That the male nipple. I mean, it doesn't give milk, but okay. So, and the other thing about grammatical gender is flawed, because when I analyze Israeli, I discover that often you maintain the grammatical gender of the original language. So, for example, Sifriya, which means library. In English, you have no grammatical gender. I mean, ships used to be she, like what you...
Right. Countries are she as well. You refer to like American she.
Exactly. So I love my motherland, but as opposed to Vaterland in German, like my fatherland.
Interesting.
So La Deutsche Vita is different. But coming back to what were we saying?
Why should language be gendered? Is there actual utility to it?
So Sifria is feminine because biblioteca and bibliothek and etc. are all feminine in all these languages that influence Israeli. And we decided to go for Sifria rather than Bet Sfarim. It used to be Bet Sfarim, house of books. A little bit like Bet Sefer. Bet Sefer means school, house of book. But Bet Sfarim, house of books, was Sifria. But now we say Sifria, which is one word, which is what they like as opposed to the German way of having kind of long words with based upon several words. But also the gender is transported from the original languages to Israeli. This is one example. Another example is Mivreshet. Mivreshet, which is this kind of, this is a funny Mivreshet. This is like, I bought it just like to do like that. This is Mivreshet. Mivreshet, usually it's longer. Mivreshet is feminine. You could have said Mivrash or Mavresh. Why do you say Mivreshet? Because Eliezer Ben Yehuda wanted it to be feminine, like die Barscht in Yiddish, or die Bürste in German, or die Bros,
but isn't that all a preference? Like, it doesn't need to be. Like, if we were to remove all gender from language, we'd be okay.
You don't need it.
Right.
You don't need it.
English proves that. English proves that you don't need.
Absolutely. But one thing you have to understand: languages differ not in what they can do, but rather in what they must do. When you speak German, you must know whether it's feminine or masculine or neutral. Otherwise, you will not be able to say the article or However, of course, you don't need it. Just like surprise, you don't need tones in Chinese. How do I know you don't need tones in Chinese? Because when I listen to Chinese music, there is no tone. There are no tones, and I can still understand according to the context. So you see, it's all a matter of degree. I mean, of course, we do not need it. I mean, in Aboriginal languages, there are only 3 numbers. In Bangla, Guma, Budara, Daba. That's it. Guma, Budara, Daba. 1, 2, 3. No 4, no 5, no 6, no 7, let alone a fortiori, Kal vachomer, no million, no. Why? Why do they need it? I mean, as a hunter-gatherer, you kill 1 kangaroo, you eat it very, very quickly, max 2 kangaroos, yeah? And then for 2 weeks, you don't need to do anything. Then you kill another one. You don't have refrigerators. You don't have abattoirs in which you cut all the, I've been to an abattoir of kangaroo tails, it's a horrible thing to see like 1,000 tails of kangaroos, but they didn't have it in the past. So what I'm trying to say is, I'm sure that there was some function initially. For example, you can think about, if you have a very complex sentence, you can think about that, if you have masculine here and feminine here, you will never confuse, because if you talk about the verb, which is masculine, it is about that. And then the other object is feminine. So of course there must be some advantages. However, it is not a necessity. But this is the beauty of language. Languages have many, many, many things that are not a necessity. I will give you one little example before the next question. There are languages like Tariana in Latin America, in which you have many evidential. What do I mean? If you say a sentence and you only heard it, you would use a verbal form which tells the hearer that you heard it. If you saw it, you will use a different verbal form. If you heard somebody who told you that he heard it from another person, you would use a different evidence. So according to what you say in the verb, we actually know whether you heard it, you saw it with your own eyes, you were told about it, etc. Now, this is extremely useful in the court. Like if there is a court case, yeah, and you say something, then the judge asks, but did you hear it? Or what's your evidence? But there you must choose what evidence you have, and then people know exactly what you meant. Now, in Israeli, we don't have it. Does this mean that the judge cannot reach the right conclusion? Of course, it doesn't mean that. So, in other words, it's useful, but it's not a necessity.
So this actually kind of leads us to the next thing I wanted to discuss with you. And you did mention it earlier, that we create terms for things we need, but then once the term or word is created, it further solidifies that concept within our society. Now, I'll give a few examples, and maybe my examples aren't great and you could push back on them, but in Hebrew, we don't really have a word for awkward, or in Israeli, we don't have a word for awkward. We have mevich, but it's pretty different. It's not the same. That's more embarrassed. And actually, Israelis have much less awkward situations. And I think it might be because we don't actually even have a word for it. Another example is there's a tribe in Africa. They have, I don't remember the exact number, but they have like 10 or 12 different words for green, depending on the shade, because it helps them identify fruits and different plants. Their eye can pick up on different types of green that we cannot. If you look at ancient writings, you'll see that the color blue didn't show up until recently. And they think,
except in the case of the Egyptians. The Egyptians
interesting.
Had blue.
Okay. And so they think we couldn't identify blue as a unique color. It was sometimes a type of green or a type of purple. And an example of this today, just one last thing, when we think of the color pink, we don't think of that as light red. But when we think of light blue, we think of it as a type of blue. And it seems like the reason we do this is because one is called light blue, the other's called pink. But if pink was just called light red, we would see it as a type of red. So,
but of course, in Israeli, we say tchelet, so we think about it differently from kahol. Because
exactly.
Right. So light blue has a different term for it. Now, what you're touching upon is a wonderful discussion. Firstly, let's begin with the blue. The reason why the ancient Hebrews and the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans did not have blue is very simple. How often do you see blue in a natural setting that will determine whether you are poisoned or not?
Never.
Almost
never, right.
Maybe like there is a very beautiful blue kind of bird, wren, it's called W-R-E-N, I think, near my house. I love them, but maybe you're not allowed to eat them. I have no idea. I mean, I've never tried to eat them, but blue is like a fruit is either green, which is bad. So if you get let's say a tomato, and you eat it when it's green, you can die of what is it, solanine or something like that. I remember when my eldest son, ate something like a tomato near the Kinneret near Tzemach, in the southern part of the Kinneret. I took him to Poria, the hospital, because they said, look, I mean, it was like a tomato, but green, and you're not allowed to eat it. So, of course, if you only have 3 colors in a language, and it's proved, you will have black, white, and red. And the red, of course, because red is blood. If you have 4, then you will have green and yellow. Then you will have only then, after black, white, red, green, and yellow, after these 5 colors that are very important, you will then have all the rest, like blue and light blue, which we call tchelet, etc. What you said about the Egyptians, they did have it because they had something that they used for the eyes, which was blue, also for their
makeup.
Yeah, and also blue for they had very nice pottery with blue. They would use it with blue. So I think because of that they had it. Now, and of course, how by the way, this is how many people misunderstand like para aduma. Brown. I forgot brown. Brown is actually, it came after red. So when people say in the Talmud there is para aduma, people say, oh, it's a red cow, it's very rare. It's all palpable poppycock because they said aduma before they had the word for brown. So you understand.
So a brown
yes,
cat.
the entire thing about para aduma, like red cow, and people look for a specific cow. Yet another example of how, like the Virgin, like the Jesus Parthenos.
Wait, this is leading to the next topic, actually. Believe it or not, yeah.
Tell me, but with regard to green, I was in a beautiful spot in China, in Chengdu, not Chengdu, like 10 hours out of Chengdu, and I looked at the lake and I told my Chinese professor friend who took me there, because I gave a keynote, and they treated me like a king. It was before all the anti-corruption laws of China. Now they don't do anything because they're afraid of violating the rules. So they do not invite you like a king. I said, wow, this is, and I think I said, this is blue. And I said, no, it's not blue, it's green. I said, what do you mean? It's blue, it's green, it's blue. And then I realized that something that I did not really know, the difference between green and blue within Chinese is different. I mean, the border is different from my border.
Interesting.
It's not that they are Daltonese or they're colorblind or I'm color. Absolutely not. It's just that the border is different. The border goes a little bit different. So you're very right about the African tribe. When it comes to awkward, the story about the what's the difference between the Shlemiel and Shlimazel?
No.
I gave a lecture once I volunteer once a year. I give a lecture at a mental hospital in Israel for the youth. Geha.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
There is a lovely woman there who asked me to do it many years ago, and since then, they liked it, and I love it because I see wonderful people, and it's heartbreaking. Anyway, so I go there once a year, and then somebody asked me about Yiddish, and I said, "What's the difference between the Shlemiel and Shlimazel?" And I said, "Well, obviously the Shlemiel spills the milk on the Shlimazel, and then one kind of mad person shout, and the Nebuch has to clean it." Nebuch is the guy who suffers and has to clean it. So the awkward is a Shlemiel. So in Israeli we say, "Al tiyeh Shlumiel, ata kazeh Shlumiel," you're such an awkward, but it's more physical. Whereas
it's not an awkward situation.
Because Israeli, as a generalization, do not use the term "the white elephant in the room." When I came, I remember I came to Sydney many years ago and said, the white elephant. I said, which white elephant are they talking about? I mean, because do you know the elephant in the room? Sorry, the elephant in the room. Do you know this expression, the elephant in the room?
Yeah, sure.
In Israeli, there is no such expression.
Yeah.
Because there is no pil b'cheder. We are blunt. We tell, if there is a pil b'cheder, then we talk about it. Whereas in Sydney, it said the elephant in the room. I said, where is the elephant in the room? What are you talking about? I just did not understand, because English is obviously only my 13th language. So I just couldn't understand the elephant. So in Israel, it's the same thing. There is no elephant in the room. There is no awkward, because people are less sensitive to awkwardness in the sense that England, people use much more sarcasm and backhand and green fucking and double language, and therefore there is awkwardness. For example, if somebody says something that the guy that he says it to does not understand, but all the others understand what he meant, then everybody is laughing in his own. But this is something which I hope it is still the case. Unfortunately, Israel is changing. Unfortunately, with this regard, I'm saying this is something that is foreign to Israel. So of course you wouldn't expect to have too many lexical items representing awkwardness. And of course, if you have a society with many mustaches, or many camels, Nahur, for example, in ancient Persian, is a camel that will not give milk until her nostrils have been tickled. So obviously, I understand nothing about camels, so I would never think that in order to give milk, I need to.
We don't need
tickle.
that word, yeah.
Yeah, but they have hundreds of camels. Like I've been to Dubai and Adar, they have like I went there to see a market of camels. They have like thousands of camels. So of course, what's the difference between this camel and that camel? And so of course it's a little bit like wine. When you talk about wine, like in Adlayada, in Adelaide, where I live, I call it Adlayada because there is a lot of wine. So until you do not know the difference between Mordechai and Haman, Adlayada. So in Adelaide, when I go a lot, I have many winemaker friends. I'm not into alcohol much, but I know a little bit. But they talk about wine and say, what did they say? What did they say? Well, they use English.
They have their own words, right? Yeah.
A normal English person would never understand. So in other words, what I'm trying to say, it's according to your need. Why should we have Nahur in Israel? We don't need Nahur in Israel. Why do they have 10 words for blue or for green? Because as you said, it is relevant to them. The Aboriginal people that do not have more than Guma, Gudara, Gaba, on the other hand, when it comes to pronouns, they look at Israeli and laugh at it, how simple and stupid Israeli is, because in their culture, kinship is so important. So if I talk to you, with you, and we are related to each other through our mother, I will use a different pronoun, we two, not we three, than if we are related to each other through our father, etc. And it's we two, and then you have we three, we plural, etc. So it is a reflection of your need, yeah.
Right. So it's mainly a reflection of your need, but there is some element to then that aspect of culture being further solidified by the word existing.
Exactly. But it doesn't mean that you will never be able to think beyond your language.
For sure.
Just as I thought of Mami Shapinatapai without speaking Yagan.
Is there an example, from different languages that because they have a certain word, a certain phrase, or a certain structure, that they're at an advantage in, let's say, emotional intelligence, which I view to be one of the single most important things we could have? And I ask this for a reason, because I wonder if there's a way in which we could improve our language to make humans be better versions of themselves.
Look, I have no doubt that it is possible. So, for example, the fact that when we speak in Israel, we use many militaristic metaphors. So, for example,
Sakash.
when Bennett...
Sofash.
What?
Sakash, Sofash.
These are all the acronyms. Absolutely. But I'm talking more than that. Like Bennett, I think he told Netanyahu, or Netanyahu told Bennett, I don't remember, don't shoot in your nagmash, within your nagmash, within this vehicle that carries many soldiers. So you don't shoot within it. Of course, it's when you say it in Australia, if you say al tira betoch hanagmash, people will think you're crazy. I mean, are you kind of how do you say hang-go or gang-ho, or like what?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, like what kind of is this like a Rambo speaking? I had a friend, her name is Shuki. She wrote and she told me a funny thing, that she went to a psychiatric. She's a psychiatrist in Israel, and Shuli, I think, and she worked in a psychiatric hospital in Sydney. And the first time she arrived, just the first night, the head of the psychiatric hospital came to her, and she was a doctor, but a beginner doctor, an intern, and he said to her, we have a situation here. We have a situation here. There is a schizophrenic who has just come to the psychiatric hospital. And she tells me that she told him, was translating from the Israeli, she said, don't threaten a whore with a dick. You know, al ta'yem al zona bezayin. Now, he fainted. He fell. He said, "What? A woman saying such a thing to me?" Of course,
It's such a good saying.
yeah, don't threaten a whore with a dick. I mean, you understand that if I tell this at the university, they will fire me.
Right, but in Hebrew, it's yeah.
So what I'm trying to say to you, if you use nagmash and you use don't threaten al ta'yem al zona bezayin and al ta'yem al yona beyayin, yeah, you have the euphemism as well. Don't threaten a pigeon with wine. Apropos adlayada. So what I'm trying to say is that if you have all these kind of militaristic language, etc., so of course subconsciously maybe it makes you kind of more prone to, you know, conflict and less. However, it reflects reality. You cannot come and just kind of cancel culture, you know, cancel the language of military, because we have the IDF in Israel and people still go to the army. So I mean, like it's kind of crazy to think. And this is, by the way, why I sometimes feel that political correctness has gone mad. I prefer to know whether somebody is an anti-Semite than to have this person saying, I love you so much, Jews are the best, you know. So in other words, this political correctness gone mad also means that you are not able to detect the deep emotions that actually exist. So in other words, when Chomsky told me, do you want to go to New York and to see, you know, go away kites? Apropos cakes, what you told me that, you know, you shouldn't say cake, right. Or I have, I see not, I do not, I see not, I did not, what did he say? I see Nazi.
I did not see that. Don't say Nazi.
I did not see.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, by the way, I pronounce it not, and you pronounce not. So I did not see. So for me, there is no Nazi.
Right.
There's no Nazi here because my pronunciation, albeit non-native, is not American. So, for example, when my friend Edna from New York told me her husband is called God, and you know, like he always, when they walk along the Fifth Avenue, he doesn't have patience for her, so he walks and she shouts, God, and you know, people just say, but why are they looking at you as mad? Oh, because God. Oh, you mean God. So the same with
the pronunciation.
What I said, Chomsky told me about the kikes. He said, do you want to go to New York and to see we hate kikes in Times Square? Actually, what I feel is that if this is what most New Yorkers feel, I know that it's not the case, but if I would actually want to see that, because then I know where I stand. Whereas he says, no, we should not let it, you know, whereas I prefer an honest and blunt environment as opposed to the Anglo environment as a general reflection, which is extremely hypocritical in Israeli terms, except that they look at this environment and they would say, no, this is a civilized environment, a polite environment, in which cordial does not mean from the heart, it means polite. What do you mean? Cordial for me, I thought it meant like very warm, very hearty. No, it means polite. So it actually tells you, just it's a microcosmos. Yeah, it's like, I believe in a fractal nature of things in linguistics. So you analyze one word, like blorit, as I told you earlier, or like cordial in British English, and you can see the entire socio-political existence. And this is the beautiful hologrammatic nature, fractal nature of language. We say maximus in minimis. So the entire world is in the little. We say God is in the details. Elohim ubapratim aktanim. This is exactly what it is.
Interesting. Okay. You have some more time for a few more questions?
Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah. Tell me.
Okay. You mentioned how So you mentioned how alma means young maiden, but in Greek, it can also mean virgin. So what you're saying is the original text, and the original Bible is written in Hebrew? Is that?
Yes, absolutely, because the New Testament, as you know, corresponds with the Old Testament.
Right.
So the
It was a
Testament,
continuation of sorts.
oh yeah, and a lot of many things that are mentioned in the New Testament, they correspond. So I mean, the mitkatvim, yeah, they correspond. They continue something in the Hebrew Bible. So in the case of Alma, you need to go to Isaiah or whatever,
Okay.
and to find the Alma that the Miriam and Alma. So this is the Yeshua and Jesus.
So you're essentially what you're doing because of your understanding in language. You can clearly identify how one of the most common beliefs in Christianity actually may mean something very different. We're both, and I'm not religious. I have no intention to trash on religion because it's very important to many people. I'm more interested in this because I like understanding where stories come from, how they manifest. Are there other areas, other things that in the original Hebrew text have very different meaning from what common Christianity today accepts as part of the story?
Absolutely. So before I talk about the Hebrew Bible, let me tell you an example from Islam. There was a guy called Luxberg, and in 2000 he published a book in which he argued that the expression Horaim, which any Muslim would understand as the virgins that they will get, the 72 virgins that they will get if they do jihad or all this thing, you go to heaven, and then you get the 72 Horaim. In fact, I mean, most people understand it as the virgins. And there was a 14-year-old boy in Israel who was found just before committing suicide and killing as many Israelis as possible. He was found, and they obviously they took control over him with a robot, and then they found that his penis was wrapped with white cloth. And he was asked, why do you have white cloth around your penis? And he said, I mean, you can check it, that I'm not making it up. He said that my mother told me that when I go to heaven and I meet my 72 Horaim, my penis has to be ready for these 72 virgins. He was 14, wow. Poor guy. So this Luxberg argued that Horaim actually does not mean virgins, but it means white raisins or sultanas. As it happens, sultana in English can mean the wife of the sultan, but you know what I mean. Sultanas are the ones that you eat, and that the entire Islamic understanding of Horaim as the 72 virgins is totally flawed, and it's a misreading of the actual etymology. Now, I'm not an expert of Islam. I'm not an expert. I mean, I speak Arabic.
It's just one example. I hear that. Yeah.
Let's assume that he is right. Do you understand? It has the potential of changing history, in the sense that you will not have these people who do such crazy things for the sake of going to the 72 verse, because they don't care about 72 white raisins. I mean, who cares about 72 white raisins? At the time, it was very, very unique. It's a little bit like anavim bamidbar. In the desert, you cannot grapes. Or as we say, bamidbar kol kotzu perach. In the desert, every thorn is a flower. Yeah. But nowadays, I mean, who cares about 72 raisins? I personally hate raisins. Anyway, so although I love grapes, coming back to the Bible, when you read the Bible, when you're an Israeli, when you're a Jew, when you read the Bible, the worst readers of the Bible are Israeli speakers. They do not only not understand the Bible, they misunderstand the Bible without realizing that they misunderstand the Bible. Let's begin. Bereshit, and Please forgive my Israeli accent because this is not how Hebrew sounded. בראשית ברא אלוהים את השמיים ואת הארץ, והארץ הייתה תוהו ובוהו, וחושך על פני תהום. I do not know an Israeli who understands this verse correctly, other than several people that I can mention. One of them was unfortunately died, Chaim Cohen from Ben Gurion University. Ben Gurion University. There is another Chaim Cohen, as you expect. There are many Chaim Cohens, but this guy, Professor Chaim Cohen, who was the successor of Moshe Held, who was a very important professor in America, who was a philologist of the Bible, and maybe several, you can count them. Bereshit. Israelis do not ask a very fundamental question. Bereshit means at the beginning of, or in the beginning of. I do not know too many students why in the beginning of what. It is actually a very weird word, Bereshit, what? Because if you said it in the beginning, you had to say Bareshit, not Bereshit. If you said Bereshit of something, Bereshit what? At the beginning of what? I mean, it is a sentence which is flawed grammatically. Now, of course, we know that the vocalization, the Nikud, came 2,000 years almost after the Bible, or 1,500 years after the Bible was codified, the Hebrew Bible. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Most people, most Christians as well, understand it. At the beginning of the creation, at the beginning, God created the sky or the heavens and the earth. Total misunderstanding of the biblical text. Shamayim wa'aretz or shamayim va'aretz in the Bible does not mean sky and earth as Israelis understand it. It does not mean it. What it means, it's a merism. Merism means it's an expression using the extremes or the edges to refer to the whole. So, for example, when I say zaken vataf, which means old people and babies, I do not mean old people and babies. I mean old people, 60 years old, 50 years old, 40 years old, everybody. I mean all the people. When I say beshivtecha uvkumecha, when you sit and when you stand, I do not mean when you sit and when you stand. I mean when you sit, when you stand, when you lie, when you sleep, when you eat, when you have sex, always, all your activities. So this is called merism. When I say Pama-Nyungan languages, which is one of the families in Australia, I do not mean Pama and Nyunga. I mean Pama, Nyunga, and everything in between. So this is called merism. Shamayim va'aretz does not mean sky and earth. It means world. So why don't we use the word olam, which is the word in Israeli for world? Because in Hebrew, olam does not mean world. It means netzach or eternity. So when an Israeli reads the Bible and say olam, he says world. No, it means eternity. Like me'ata ve'ad olam. So from now until eternity. So what I'm trying to say, and then ve'aretz hayta tohu vavohu. What's tohu vavohu? If you ask an Israeli, say, oh, balagan, like chaos, a lot of stuff, rubbish, poppycock. It's exactly the opposite. Tohu vavohu means nothing and nothing. Nothing and nothing. So there was nothing to do balagan with it, to do chaos, to do mess. It was not mess. And this is how Christians also understand it like that. So, I mean, the Bible is totally misunderstood. And what they need is not a rabbi.
Both testaments.
What?
Both the Old and the New Testament are completely misunderstood, you're saying.
Absolutely. And sometimes I think Israelis would understand the Bible better if they read English, because the English is easier. Mm-hmm. The Bible in Hebrew is very hard because it's written in Hebrew. It's not written in Israeli. And when I was a child, they told me, oh, you speak Hebrew, and the Bible is in Hebrew. Oh, it's not a problem. The problem is that you do not look at the glosses when you think that you know the word from Hebrew. You need to look at the translation all the time, not just when you think you don't understand, because you don't understand when you think you understand. So tohu vavohu and tehom. I mean, tehom, many people think it's abyss, tehom, like in Israel. But actually, tehom means water. So a lot of water.
Interesting.
So, I mean, this is just an example. I could give you thousands of examples because and there are only 8,000 words in the Bible, sort of big lexicon. You know, like in English, you have 1 million words. In Israeli, you have more than 100,000. So I can give you thousands of examples. Don't trust a rabbi who gives you an etymology from the Bible. What you need is a philologist or a linguist who knows how to read the Bible. There are not too many people who know, unfortunately, and therefore I wouldn't trust anything that they tell you, oh, as it is written in the Bible, you should do this. I mean, there's so many funny things. Every time I go to the synagogue,
there's other reasons not to believe it, but we won't get into that right now.
No worries.
Look, one more question, and then I want to do a speed round, which is like quick questions. This will be only for Patreon supporters. I'll explain more about that in a few minutes, but last question, maybe two more, depending on how much time we have. Etymology of the word Palestine. I've been interested in understanding more where the word Palestine comes from. It's constantly debated in the work that I do.
Well, I don't know. You can tell me about the debate. I mean, for me, it's from a pleshet, which comes from pelesher, liflosh, like falasha. You know, we used to call the.
Okay, so that seems to be the consensus. But what does that mean? Does that mean invader?
We'll need to check whether the term invader came after the Plishtim or before the Plishtim. So definitely in Israeli, liflosh means to invade. But the question that you need to ask is the etymology of Plishtim in the Bible. And this is beyond my ken and, of course, beyond my law. So in other words, I will need to go back. I can answer this.
Okay.
If you want, I can check it and then we can come back to each other if you want.
Yeah, I'd love to know that. I don't find it a particularly important piece of information, but you often have, not often, there is an argument saying Palestine comes from invader. We find that offensive. You've had so many thousands of years for the meaning to change. Palestine has been used in different variations for the land or a group of people. And it doesn't matter if that's an important national identity to a group of people. And, we shouldn't get offended because it's somehow related to the word invader from a few thousand years ago. So I don't find it particularly important, but I thought you might have some insight. But yeah, if you could.
So what I need to check is the meaning of Palash before Plishtim, because it's true that if you tell about somebody today, and this is why we changed the falasha. Falasha was politically incorrect for the Tabiban, for the Jews who came from Ethiopia. The Tabiban are the clever ones, but we call them falasha. And then I said, no, we don't want to be called falasha because we are not invaders. This is correct because these days, litlosh means to invade, so this is politically incorrect.
So we don't know what came first.
At the time of the Plishtim, I want to check whether it was already invaders. And by the way, even if it is invaders in the Bible, I mean, firstly, you also need to make sure that the Palestinians today are the same as the Plishtim in the Bible. I don't think
they're not. I mean, they recognize they're not. Like that's not even part of the conversation. Exactly. It's like, yeah, words evolve and they change. The meaning changes.
If you talk about political correctness, I mean, Philistine, that many people in English that many people associate with Palestinian, Philistine is an extremely offensive term in English. So Philistine means, like a bogan or a redneck, somebody who doesn't know much, etc. Like don't be a Philistine, which comes from the Plishtim in the Bible. So the Palestinians can say, stop saying Philistine because some people might understand it as related to Spain because he said Palestine. So Palestine. I mean, don't forget that the fur has to do with, I mean, it's the same as in Arabic. You don't have the fur, you say fur. So look, I mean, there is no limit. I mean, bugger, when the queen I assume that the queen, say, when she's angry, she calls her husband, you poor bugger, or whatever. Bugger means Bulgarian, originally. Burg, and, and bugger, there was a kind of a sect of homosexuals who moved from Sofia to Paris in the 11th century, etc. And this is why we say bug. But I've never heard of a Bulgarian who would write a letter to the queen, please forbid people from using the word bugger because it means Bulgarian. And by the way, this is a real etymology as opposed to
interesting.
As opposed
so
to
there's a lot of examples. There's a lot of examples of this. Yeah.
As opposed to niggardly, that has nothing to do with niggardly, but you're not allowed to be niggardly. If you say niggardly in America, you're fired. You're fired.
You can't say it anymore. Right, you can't say it anymore, yeah.
They killed the word niggardly as they killed the word aliz. Aliz in Israeli, which means gay, but you cannot say aliz for gay, for homosexual. It's politically incorrect. And you cannot say aliz for happy. So, I mean, the word has been killed.
Interesting.
Is this politically correct to kill a word? I mean, that's another question. Is it just to kill a word?
I guess it depends. I personally don't think so, but I think that if words have very difficult histories, then people who are part of that history should have a say in it. But things like niggardly and nigga in Chinese are not connected to any bad meaning. They just sound similar. So I would say that does not, the group in question does not get the final say in that, because that just sets a very bad precedent that any oppressed group can just cancel any word they want because they find it offensive. Like we should reject that notion.
It's a little bit like, these days they destroy sculptures of old people that, like roads, roads. I went to Cape Town. I gave a lecture in Cape Town, and there was a sculpture of roads, such a road who gave a lot of money, but he was apparently racist or whatever. So they destroyed his, even, Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. Rhodes Scholar is by the name of Rhodes, Cicero. However, it's like not only destroying his sculpture, but also destroying the saying that says all roads bring to Rome, or something, because roads sounds like roads, as RHODES. I mean, it's kind of it's
exactly. It's endless. It's endless.
Exactly.
So. I also want to talk to you about the revival of, you're working on the revival of Aboriginal languages, but we might need to save that.
But this one, I think we need another session.
Exactly, because that's its own thing. So we will do a round two. Yeah, I do want to do a quick speed round with you. Try to answer them with like just a few words, even it could be yes or no. It could be one word. This will be only for Patreon subscribers. If you're not a Patreon subscriber yet, you can find a link in the description. Those who support us on Patreon really help us make more of this amazing content. So this is really a way to reward them. So you can find a link in the description for those viewing or listening. Great. Yeah. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave the audience with? Where can people find you? Links will also be in the description.
Well, absolutely. I mean, anybody who would like to ask me a question can email me at gzuckermann@gmail.com. So Zuckermann is a German way, Zuckermann, Zuckermann, sugar daddy, Zuckermann, sugar man. So G as Ghil'ad, G Zuckermann, GZUCKERMANN @strudel, as we say in Israeli, gmail.com. And I would be very happy to answer any question. Hopefully you ask me the question after you read this book, Revivalist.
I'll put links to all of this in the description so people could find your books and your email.
Really, and you don't speak English, then I recommend this. This is, look, it was wonderful talking to you, Adar, and it's very late here now, and tomorrow morning I have to be here very, very early. So
get some sleep. Thank you so much for your time.
No, it's a pleasure, and we should have another session about the Aboriginal Australia.
I'd love to talk about that as well. I'll reach out to you and we'll schedule around two. Thank you so much, Ghil'ad. It was a pleasure.
And this is Klingon. This is Klingon. It comes from the Kohanim, the Leonard Nimoy took it from the Kohanim.
You're right. I recently learned that from a friend, Rudy Roshman, who's an activist. He explained that this is a Kohanim.
Oh, I know it from the moment it was released, because I knew somehow that Nimoy was asked by the director, and Nimoy just remembered that he was a Kohen, and I told you I'm a Kohen too, and this is why this is the only thing. So every time my Klingon friends do like that, I say, yeah, I'm a Kohen. So,
amazing. Bye, Ghil'ad. Thank you.
Bye. Take care. Bye.